Monday Night Football, Week 15, we have a very special treat. 2 games. We have the Chicago Bears, the Minnesota Vikings, and the Atlanta Falcons at the Las Vegas Raiders. Welcome to the full Monday Night Football breakdown. If you've never been here before, my name is Max, a.k.a. Loeb's Leads. I do these every single week for the Thursday night game, the biggest games on Sunday, and now Monday night games, plural, but Monday Night Football, giving you the best information possible based on coverage data, run scheme metrics, and overall logistical information about each matchup for your fantasy teams, as well as your higher or lower projections. There will be timestamps below for each of the 2 matchups, but before we get into either of them, I want to make sure you guys know where you can get all my picks and predictions for these games, as well as games down the line. So I'm going to show you that very, very briefly. There are links below. On Instagram, that is where all my exclusive picks will be. You have to be following my Instagram, guys. We're on the road to 40K there. We're almost there. Make sure you are following the Instagram. Click that link below. And on Twitter, there's more fun picks, less research-backed picks, some parlays, things like that, just for fun on X. But that's where all our first touchdowns, anytime touchdowns, all that stuff is going to be there. So make sure you're following. If you're making picks on these games, as always, sleeper, underdog, and better picks will give you half yard and half completion specials, as well as a bonus on each. Sleeper is going to give you 11 free entries if you join with code LEADS. That's the key here. You got to join with the code. Underdog is going to give you a deposit bonus up to $1,000, and Better Picks is going to give you a deposit match up to $200. All of that stuff, links below. But the most important thing, guys, if you're new and you're not part of the family already, make sure you subscribe below. We're on the road to 10K. It's unbelievable to even say and think that. You guys have been supporting like crazy. We've had 2 really, really good weeks. These breakdowns are being really, really useful for your fantasy team as well as your higher or low projections. So make sure you subscribe. Make sure you join the family. And if you enjoy this type of content, like this video, guys. It helps me know that you enjoy what I'm doing. Without further ado, though, let's get into the Chicago Bears, Minnesota Vikings game. If you guys have never been here before, we start with data outliers. These are things that basically defenses allow a lot of or don't allow a lot of, that allows us to look at certain players, certain matchups, as well as the coverage data and what that provides in the pass game on each side. So the Chicago Bears, in terms of the pass game, quarterback-wise, they're giving up the 5th fewest attempts, and they're 20th in yards allowed. So they're solid against the pass, but there is a smaller area they struggle with. Even though they're not giving up a bunch of receptions to tight ends, they're middle of the pack, they're giving up the 6th most yards to tight ends. So a guy like TJ Hawkinson, we'll talk about him in a minute here, definitely someone we want to look at, as well as struggling on the ground, which walking into the year, I did not think the Bears would struggle on the ground. They were pretty good last year against the run, but they're giving up the 9th most attempts, partially because they've been losing a lot of games, but they're also giving up the 3rd most rush yards. We're going to talk about the run data, what they struggle with, what the Vikings are good and bad at. But truthfully, guys, the Vikings are a pass-first team. So we got to look at the coverage on the Chicago side. They run the 7th most zone coverage, as well as the 5th most middle field close. That means a lot of zone. A lot of the zone that they're going to run is cover 3, maybe some simulators, some special things, but middle field close. Not a ton of cover 4, cover 2, cover 6, middle field close. In terms of where they're being targeted, though, this is where we need to look at, because when you look at the overall numbers and game logs against the Chicago Bears team, guys, the performances are few and far between where you're like, oh, yeah, this guy had a big game. Like, sure, Terry McLaurin had a big game against them. You can scroll down a little bit here. Like, Juwan Jennings played pretty well against them. But you look at the other receivers, other than Addison the last time these guys played, Jefferson had 2 catches for 27 yards. Christian Watson may have had 150 yards, but 4 catches. In terms of overall receiver data, they are very much middle of the pack, 18th and 16th in receptions and yards, respectively. And then like Marvin Harrison didn't do too much. Jaguars receivers, nothing. Panthers receivers, nothing. But as you do look at these game logs, you see they struggle against elite receivers. Maybe the 8 for 135 game against Nico Collins kind of woke him up a little bit. But I really want to look at the tight end data, because you can scroll back here. Kittle had a crazy game against him. Laporta didn't do too much, but he caught 2 touchdowns against him. Hawkinson had 114 against him. Hooper had 64, which is crazy to me. Evan Engram had 102. Zach Ertz had 77. Scrolling back up, nothing really there. But again, you look at the tight ends they played, nobody really crazy in the first 5 weeks of the season. So tight end data is super important here, because when you look at the target rates where the Chicago Bears are being targeted, inline tight end spot, the highest rate in the entire NFL. On the other side, the Minnesota Vikings are throwing to that inline tight end spot, and it's not just TJ Hawkinson. We're going to talk about the other pass catchers too. But in that inline tight end spot at the 4th highest rate. So that to me makes you look at TJ Hawkinson's yards, not catches, because remember, they're very much middle of the pack in terms of receptions allowed to tight ends. But you look at TJ Hawkinson, and what's probably going to be a pass-heavy game on both sides, but on the Vikings side, and I love his yards. And I'll pull it up on Sleeper. We'll pull the projection up really quick so we were on the same page with the yards. But remember, he had 100+ last time they played. He's been playing really well. And like I said, the Chicago Bears run a ton of zone. That's very, very important in this, because when you look at the overall zone numbers for the Chicago Bears and how the Minnesota Vikings produce in the pass game against them, Justin Jefferson has the most yards per out run, the highest target percentage, most targets, most receptions. But in terms of overall target percentage, like how often they're being targeted on the field, and remember, TJ Hawkinson missed half the year. TJ Hawkinson is second, right behind Justin Jefferson. 24 targets, 18 receptions, only 1.38 yards per out run, which is not a ton, but he's running a lot of routes, and that's the bottom line. So TJ Hawkinson projected 41 yards against this Bears team that he had 114 against. And you can look at some of the game logs since he's been back. He's played 3 straight weeks, actually, with 60+% of snaps, which is great. He's hit it in 2 of 3 weeks. Against Arizona, not a really tight end. They don't struggle against tight ends. The week prior, Tennessee, nothing crazy against tight ends. That's also a very cover 4, cover 6 heavy team. They're balanced in what they do. But you look at a team like Jacksonville, he had 8 for 72. India's first game back, he had 3 for 27, but almost touched that number. I like 41 yards for TJ Hawkinson a lot. Josh Oliver, Johnny Munt, 3 and 4 behind TJ Hawkinson in terms of target rate, how often they're being targeted against zone, which is very important to note. But the elephant in the room here is Jordan Addison. He had a crazy game against him last time. Look, if they're going to pass the football, he's going to get his. He's projected 55 receiving yards. He's had that in 3 of the last 4. And then overall, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so about half the game. So maybe you look at the track record with Jordan Addison, you don't love it. But on that side, guys, I absolutely love TJ Hawkinson. There's another little aspect I love here too. So I looked at the Bears' run defense. We talked about their third in yards allowed. Number 1, I'll pull up the data here in a second. They really struggle with explosive runs. The Vikings are one of the least explosive running teams in the entire NFL, which is definitely something to note. But you just look at I'm on the wrong thing here. You just look at the overall rush data for the Minnesota Vikings. Like, I'll go to yards per game. They are not a team that's going to continue to run it down your throat. Like, they are middle of the pack in terms of rush yards per game, 113.2. In terms of rush attempts, again, they're a little bit above average, so 359. But if you do really want to lean into Aaron Jones, Cam Akers, whoever it may be my guest. To me, that backfield's a little bit too volatile. Aaron Jones just projected 65 rushing yards. He's hit it in 2 of the last 4. He hit it against Chicago in week 12, whenever the last time they played at 100 yards. I don't know. Like, I look at his performances in close games, divisional games, and they've been pretty good, but I don't know if I can confidently lean into that. I think it's a solid pick, like if you're going to tease it down, which we will do on our Instagram. So if you're not following, follow there. If you want to tease it down and put it as a leg to something, maybe say 50+ yards, I like that. I don't know if I can fully ride the 65. The data likes it, though. Last part of the Bears. 3rd best red zone defense in the NFL, 5th most field goals allowed. Will Reichert hasn't made a field goal since coming back from injury. He's actually 0 for 3. But if the Vikings get stopped in the red zone, which very, very well could, and I'm going to go look back at that game, I believe, how many field goals did the Vikings kick in week? I guess I can pull it up. I believe they kicked 3 field goals against the Bears in week 12, whenever they played last, on the road. Now they're kicking in a dome. I think Will Reichert, 2 field goals, is definitely something to look at, too, if you want one more leg. I think that's a pretty solid addition. But let's go to the other side here, and we'll pull up the pass data for you, because the Minnesota Vikings, they struggle through the air, right? They're very, very good on the ground. 29th most yards, so 4th fewest, and then 3rd fewest attempts. They're not going to give up anything on the ground. And in the air, they're not really giving up anything to running backs. Middle of the pack against tight ends, but in terms of overall pass game, 3rd most yards per game in the NFL allowed. In terms of overall attempts, the most attempts in the NFL allowed. And then wide receiver numbers. They're giving up the most yards and most receptions to opposing wide receivers. When we go look at the game log for the Chicago Bears against the Minnesota Vikings, you can see who performed really well. So that was week 12. Keenan Allen had 9 for 86. DJ Moore had 7 for 106. Rome Odunze had 5 for 39. Now, the Vikings play a ton of zone too. They are the 6th most zone heavy team, but they're very middle field open heavy. So they'll play a lot of cover 2, a lot of cover 4. a good amount of cover 6, but a lot of middle field open. So quarters or quarter, half, or just pure 2. That's where they're going to go. When they get targeted, it's pretty balanced, but they're getting targeted in the slot at a higher rate comparatively to out wide, inline, and the backfield. 10th highest rate in the NFL. So we got to look at the slot route participation because the Bears are also throwing to the slot at the 6th highest rate. So there's a nice little marriage there. What the Bears want to do offensively and what the Vikings allow defensively. Interestingly enough, though, they're still getting targeted out wide. They're tied for 16th, so middle of the pack. But the Bears, they're not throwing to the inline spot, not throwing to the running back spot a ton, and Roschon Johnson is out. They're throwing out wide at the 11th highest rate. So something to lean into there with the receivers too. In terms of slot routes, which is the most important thing here, because if you want to lean into the slot, you got to look at who's running the routes. Keenan Allen has the most overall targets from the slot and the most overall routes from the slot. But Rome Odunze, still running a good amount of routes. He has the 3rd highest route participation from the slot. He'll also run some from out wide. Highest targets per route run, highest yards per route run, which is very interesting. Very, very interesting. Now, he is not playing as much as Keenan Allen is, as much as DJ Moore is. He's obviously their number 3 receiver. But when you go look at the Bears against zone, DJ Moore is going to lead in target percentage, 64 targets, 46 receptions, 1.34 yards per route run. Keenan Allen's right below him, 43 targets, 25 receptions, and 1.25 yards per route run. But remember, this is ranked in terms of target percentage. That's how often you're being targeted when you're on the field. Rome Odunze, well, actually, let me say this. Number 3 is DeAndre Swift. He's got 28 catches on 31 targets, 1.42 yards per route run. I don't know how much I love his receiving against this team. I guess we can go look at the game log real quick because I don't exactly know the exact production, him through the air. Okay, so he had 3 for 35, and Roschon Johnson also had 1 for 10. So maybe we look at the projections for DeAndre Swift after this. But Rome Odunze has more targets than Keenan Allen against zone, more receptions than Keenan Allen against zone, and more yards per route run against zone than Keenan Allen does. So he is outproducing Keenan Allen, but he's just not being targeted as much. What does that mean? I don't know. And this is zone overall. I know I just said he has more targets per route run. That's from the slot. He's not getting targeted overall as much as Keenan Allen is. So let's go look at these projections. And again, all the projections, guys, are on Sleeper below. Make sure you follow or check that out if you haven't already. Join with code LEADS, you get some bonus cash. DJ Moore projected 58 receiving yards. I don't mind it, to be honest with you. I think, truthfully, guys, I don't think it's a horrible idea to tease all 3 Bears receivers down. So, like, DJ Moore, you could go 40 or 50. Keenan Allen's projected 49 receiving yards. Keenan Allen, you could go 40. And then Rome Odunze is projected 41. Rome Odunze, you can go 25 if you want. But teasing all of them down, I like. I think I'm still going to lean DJ Moore before anywhere else because he will still run a good amount of routes from the slot, just not as much as Allen and Odunze, and he had a big, big game against them last time. And it's not like the Vikings aren't giving up stuff out wide. Like, they're still being targeted out there, middle of the pack. The Bears are throwing out there at above average rates, and they're giving up the most yards at the end of the day. So if you want to get on a pass catcher, truthfully, guys, I would trust the number 1 receiver more than I trust anybody else. I know the numbers will say Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze will produce more in the slot, and that's where the Vikings are going to get targeted. But DJ Moore is their number 1, and he's still going to run some routes from the slot, just not as much as those other guys. And at the end of the day, he has the highest target percentage against zone, which the Minnesota Vikings are 6th in the NFL in. So I'm going to lean into DJ Moore before anything else. But I think the way to go, especially with this game, and this will be on my Instagram, make sure you're following the Instagram, is to tease down the receivers on the Bears a little bit. Probably tease down Hawkinson. I think you tease down Addison too, and then you ride from there. So 5 receivers tease down because it's going to be a pass game. It's in a dome. To me, that's where you lean. Let's move to the other game now, though. Atlanta against Las Vegas, guys. This is an ugly game. It's an ugly game. There's no sugarcoating. In terms of overall data, there's not a ton of data outliers that I really like. This is an ugly, ugly, ugly game. Ugly game. But we still got to look at it. On Atlanta's side, in terms of pass attempts, pass yards, middle of the pack. Running back, 25th most attempts, so they're below average, and then 20th most yards on the ground. Here's what's really interesting, though. The receptions allowed to running backs is the 3rd highest in the league, but the yards is the 23rd highest. So it's just checkdowns, they're rallying up. Wide receiver, though, this is where we got to notice. Wide receiver, they're giving up the 4th most receptions and the 6th most yards. Now you look at the tight end numbers. They're giving up 23rd most receptions, 20th yards, and you're like, okay, Jakobi Meyers, right? Sure, you can say that. But here's the thing. The Falcons run the 11th most zone in the NFL. They're very balanced in terms of middle field open, middle field closed, but the 11th most zone in the NFL. When you look at their target rate, they are being targeted in the slot at the 9th highest rate, the backfield at the 4th highest rate. That's where all those receptions come. We'll talk about the Raiders, route runners, and receiving production from there in a minute. But in the slot at the 9th highest rate is where I think, because in terms of slot route participation, Brock Bowers is your number one guy. Brock Bowers is your number one guy. And you look at the overall tight end numbers, like, okay, 23 for 20. Yeah, sure. Let's go look at these game logs for dynamic tight ends against the Atlanta Falcons, because to me, that is where you have to look and say, okay, is there anybody that's really produced against this team that's just run a ton of routes from the slot? Let's go look here. So you look now, TJ Hawkinson had 4 for 45 against them. It's not a bad game, but Jake Ferguson, 7 for 71. You can, again, go look at these guys week 10, 11, and 13. There's nothing there. 7 for 71. Cade Otton, huge slot guy, and this was without Mike Evans, I believe. It was out without Mike Evans. 9 for 81, scored twice, guys. Scored twice. And this is with Mike Evans, so you can see the difference there. And then you go up and look at the slot guys in these games. Obviously, Addison and Jefferson had crazy games last time, but McConkey, the slot guy, 9 for 117. Vele, 4 for 66. He is the slot guy there. I'm not going to read too much into the Saints. CeeDee Lamb is the main slot guy in Dallas, 8 catches, 47 yards. And then we have, that was the Cade Otton game, okay. JSN here, 3 for 9 is the only one that pushed me away, because I know he is the slot guy there. That pushed me away. But when Deontay Johnson was the slot guy in Carolina, 6 for 78. The leading receiver, Tampa Bay, 5 for 64. It was Chris Godwin. Didn't get in the end zone, though. Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, both balanced from the slot the early part of the year, 8 apiece. Rashee Rice, slot guy, 10 for 1 or 12 for 110. That's pretty much it. So to me, I look at this data and I look where the Falcons are struggling. It's the slot. Jakobi Meyers will run a good amount of routes from the slot. But again, we talked about zone. They run the 11th most zone. In terms of target percentage, Brock Bowers number 1. Targets, Brock Bowers number 1. Receptions, Brock Bowers number 1. Yards per route run, which is a huge stat here, Brock Bowers number 1. That is the guy. To me, that is the guy. And I look at his projection. You can look at the raw numbers, say, okay, they're not giving up a ton of yards or catch tight ends. Sure, go ahead. Be my guest. Think like that. 63 receiving yards is too low. 63 receiving yards is too low. Him and Myers were both projected 63, actually. So again, if you want to tease them both down, tease them both down. I like Myers. I do, especially because he's got 44 catches against zone, which is the second most on the Raiders. But I think you have to lean into Bowers and understand where the Falcons are struggling, understand where they're giving up a lot of targets, and know that he is running a lot of routes in those soft spots in their zones. Bowers yards is the way that I like, and on that side at least. Let's look at the running back receiving production from the Raiders, though, because that is important. When you have a team that's given up the 3rd most receptions but the 23rd most yards. And McCormick has had 2 catches in back-to-back games, actually, so it is something to note. But McCormick is taking over the backfield, guys. And to me, the bottom line is you can lean into him and kind of trust him. Now, his reception prop is not out yet. But I do think if it's 1.5 catches, I think you go higher on that. The other angle I like right now in this game is, and also, before I say anything else, if you got Jakobi Meyers on your fantasy team, I'm not telling you to bench him. I'm not telling you to freak out about him. I think he's going to have a good game. But in terms of whose yards I'm most confident about, it's Bowers. It's still Bowers. That's the other side. We'll talk other side Raiders defense in a second here. But looking at the data outliers on that Vegas side, they're just slightly below average against the pass and slightly above average against the run. So there's really no lean here. But we'll go through all this data. It's not going to mean too much because, truthfully, guys, my pick here is none of the pass catchers. None of the pass catchers. I think they could have good games, but I'm not confident that one of their matchups is so far beyond the other. So in terms of pass yards given up, the 13th most, 12th most pass attempts. Wide receiver yards given up, 18th most receptions, 21st most yards. But they give up a ton of receptions and yards to tight ends. Now, this is something where you look at it and you're like, okay, is this also like a tight end slot thing with the Atlanta Falcons when they're just being really good against tight ends or really bad against tight ends because they're being targeted in the slot? Well, let's go look at some of the slot performances against the Las Vegas Raiders in the past, because Travis Kelce was the big one. Travis Kelce is obviously the big slot guy, and he's had a couple good games against them. But Cade Otton had 3 for 70. Travis Kelce, 7 for 68 on 13 targets. But Jonnu Smith had a huge game. Mike Gesicki had a huge game. Travis Kelce had another big game. If you want to lead into Colby Parkinson, be my guest, or Pat Freiermuth, be my guest. Adam Troutman, be my guest. David Njoku did not play in this game. Nothing here from the Panthers. Andrews at 4 for 51, which is definitely something to note. But anytime they played just good overall tight ends, they struggled. When you look at slot wide receivers, though, slot wide receivers, I can't confidently say I love anything here. Like, Tyreek Hill is the main slot guy there, 7 for 61. Like, that's not bad. Vele, 6 for 80. That's pretty good. Kelsey's the main slot guy for Kansas City, so I'm not even going to talk about that. But, like, Chase is the main slot guy without T. Higgins, 7 for 43. Here again, Kansas City, not going to talk about that. Cup didn't play in this Rams game, so, again, can't really do too much there. Austin had 2 for 36. Troy Franklin, who was the slot guy when Vele was not playing, 1 for 20. Elijah Moore, 1 for 11. That was with Deshaun Watson, so it is important to note that. But 1 for 11. Deontay Johnson had a big game, 8 for 22. Zay Flowers had a big game, 7 for 19. But then look at Ladd McConkey, only 39 yards. Like, what I'm trying to tell you guys is they're being targeted in the slot at a high rate, 13th highest in the league. And Atlanta's thrown in the slot at the highest rate in the league. Drake London and Darnell Mooney are both balanced in terms of how much they run routes from the slot, which is a good thing, and that could lean into yards. Now, they play the 9th most man coverage in the NFL, and when you look at overall yards per route run, Mooney is actually has more yards per route run than London, but less targets, less target rate, or lower target rate, less receptions. Mooney's projected 18 less yards. So if I want to get on a pass catcher in this game, I'm going to get on Darnell Mooney, especially because I think big plays could come really for both of them. But for Darnell Mooney, when you're not getting the best corner is probably going to be on Drake London. When you're not getting the best corner in this game. In terms of overall target rates, there's nothing to write home about with out wide, in line, or backfield. It's all in the slot. Mooney's going to get some from the slot. But there's really nothing else. Like, I looked at Kyle Pitts because, trust me, guys, I don't want to do anything with Kyle Pitts, but he's only projected 28 yards, and that could happen on one play. So if you want to take the risk with Kyle Pitts, I don't mind it. But in terms of his route participation versus man, 2 catches, guys. He's had 2 catches versus man all year. Like, you can't lean into that. What I am going to do, though, and this is the pick that I love the most. I don't mind Darnell Mooney yards here. But the Raiders are giving up the 3rd most field goal attempts in the NFL. And the Falcons have the 7th worst red zone offense in the NFL. That Raiders red zone defense holistically is a little bit below average, but lately they've been playing very well in the red zone. Very well. Go back to that Chiefs game. Shut the door constantly. 2 field goals for Younghoe Koo. And I know this is tough because he's got to make them and he's struggled recently. But 2 field goals for Younghoe Koo, I think, is the best way to go here. So that is what I got for that game. We'll recap real quick. So Chicago, Minnesota, again, I think you tease down and put them all together, and this will be on my Instagram, so make sure you follow. Addison, Hawkinson, and then all 3 Bears receivers, but I like Hawkinson yards a lot. I like Will Reichert 2 field goals a lot, and if I had to pick somebody on Chicago's side, because of how effective he is against man, I'm going to go DJ Moore because there's not a ton that separates him from Allen and Odunze in terms of their projections. So I'd go DJ Moore there, and then on the other side, Bowers yards, I like. I think you can tease down him and Myers and put them together if you want. I like Bowers yards a lot. He's very good against zone. And then the other side, it's a nightmare. If I had to pick one pass catcher, I'd go Darnell Mooney. I'm not going to do it straight probably, though. And then Younghoe Koo, 2+ field goals. So that's what we got for the Monday night games. If you guys enjoyed this video, again, I appreciate you watching. Make sure you leave a like and subscribe if you're not part of the family already. We will see you next Wednesday afternoon. But next Wednesday for Thursday Night Football, that is the Chargers and the Broncos, so that'll be a good game. Man-heavy Broncos team, zone-heavy Chargers team, so that will give us a lot of really, really good data to look at some pass catchers. And honestly, they're both pretty good against the run too, so that's probably all we'll look at. But if you guys did enjoy this video, make sure you leave a like, make sure you leave a comment, and subscribe if you're not already. God bless you guys. Enjoy your Sunday and your Monday, and we will see you Wednesday afternoon for the Thursday Night Football Breakdown.